Hi, everyone. I am recording this after I recorded my reaction video because of a couple of things. First of all, it went really long because I covered both AP World and APUSH. So if you are just here for the APUSH, once you get past the brief introduction, you might want to fast forward about 15 or 20 minutes to get to the APUSH part. You're welcome to listen to all of it if you want to, but I always try to keep my episodes fairly short, and I failed greatly on the last episode of this season. Second of all, you'll notice in the horizontal video version, there's space over here. That's because when I do my edits, I will drop in the questions so that you can see them, but they're also going to be dropped in the show notes. And I do mention that at some point in time during the video. It was like an afterthought. But now that I'm doing this pre-recording, I wanted to mention that as well. So I hope you enjoy. Are you breathing a big sigh of relief about right now? Oh my gosh. I'm breathing a big sigh of relief for you. I know when I finished my last tutoring session with an APUSH student on Thursday night, I kind of did a little jump for joy, okay. And I'm sure that's how you guys felt after the exam. A little bit of exhaustion, a lot of excitement, I hope. So this is a special episode to wrap up our season, and I will be back in August, which is when school starts in much of the year. And, these episodes are always available to listen when they apply to you. So if you're taking another AP class, or if you're just a lover of history, please be sure to come back and join us then. This is my unboxing episode. You will get to watch my real-time reaction to the FRQs for both AP World and APUSH. And I'm going to do them in that order because that's the order in which they were released. Now, remember to tell your friends who are going to be taking AP history classes, AP World, APUSH, and AP Euro, because next year those guys are going to get a little bit of love, to be sure to tune into AP History Help on whatever platform they listen to podcasts on. I'm also on YouTube. I'm also on my website, aphistoryhelp.com. And I'm also available to answer questions. A few people have messaged me throughout the year. I've given them quick answers. There's others who have found me and I tutored them for much of the year. So I am here for all kinds of help. But with that, this is going to take a little bit, but get ready for the unboxing because here we go. All right, so I'm just going to click on where it says 2025 free response questions. Again, we're doing AP World first. Aha, we have 2 sets of tests again this year, which means double the time to look at the FRQ. So AP World free response questions, set 1. Here we go. All right, the first question, this looks different, and that's because you guys took it on the computer, I know. Okay, sorry, just taking me a second here. All right, so the first question is a secondary source, U.S. anthropologist in an academic book. Identify one claim the author makes in the first paragraph. They've been doing that a lot lately, asking for a claim. And a claim is kind of easy as long as you get the rest of it. Identify one claim the author makes in the first paragraph about the effect of the discovery of the Americas on Africa. Interesting. I'm sure it's in the passage. Describe one economic change in the Americas that occurred as a result of the developments discussed in the second paragraph. And explain one reason why American Indians became victims of the discovery of America, in quotes, as suggested by the author in the last sentence of the passage. I'm not going to get into answering every single one of these. It would take way too long, although maybe I'll make individual videos that I'll release over the summer. Idea just came to my head. But totally fair questions. I love the identify one claim because it's an easy question to get right, as long as you're doing it about the effect of discovery of the Americas on Africa. An economic change that occurred in the Americas as a result of developments discussed, and I think totally reasonable. One reason why American Indians became victims of discovery of America. Yeah, absolutely. Easy peasy, I think, for this first one. All right, moving on to the next one, the primary source. Ooh, 2 written primary sources. Usually they have a written and some kind of visual. That's surprising. All right, so the source is Louise Otto Peters, a German writer, first issue of the women's newspaper, the first women's newspaper published in Germany in 1849. The publish was banned by the government in Saxony, Germany. Okay, so identify one likely audience for the claims. See how that comes in, like the sourcing stuff that you need to do, audience, point of view, those things, they ask them in other ways besides the DBQ. Identify one likely audience for this claim and that the author makes in the passage. So one likely audience for the claims that the author makes. So you have to identify the claims and who are those claims intended for. Not bad. Describe one historical context during the 19th century that explains the increased poverty and misery referred to in the 4th paragraph. Okay, so you just have to read the 4th paragraph and then think about like what historical context set that up. And they're talking about we each want to earn our liberty and our humanity, not by striving individually, each one for herself, but rather by looking at those who languish, forgotten, and neglected in poverty, misery, and ignorance for all. I don't know. Historical context. I would talk about the Industrial Revolution, certainly, because this was from 1849 and Germany. So they had relatively recently started factory system and industrial revolution, which would lead to poverty and people working really hard and getting not a whole lot out of it. C, explain how one ideology or set of ideas likely influenced the author's claim in the passage. So again, determine what the claim is that the author's making, and then ideology, set of ideas, communism, capitalism, something along socialism, any of those might be possible depending on what her claim is. And like I said, I'm not going to go and answer every one of them at this time. All right. And then you get to choose between questions 3 or 4 for the short answer question. So question 3 is identify one technological or military factor that contributed to the expansion of Muslim empires, such as the Ottoman, Safavid, or Mughal empires, so your gunpowder empires. One technological factor, gunpowder, hello, from 1300 to 1600. I would write that. I would jot that down on my notes. B, explain one way that Muslim rulers during the period circa 1300 to 1600 used economic policies to generate revenue for their states or empires. Muslim rulers, economic policies. Oh, the jizya, perhaps, that was charged to non-Muslims, maybe. C, explain one reason why some Muslim rulers during the period 1300 to 1600 adopted tolerant policies toward religious or ethnic minorities. Totally fair question. This is a maybe. Let's see what question 4 is asking, because remember, you get to pick between the 2 of them. And by the way, I do have this space for the horizontal version of the video. I have the space next to me where I'll put the questions so you can see them. I'll also put a link to them in the show notes if you want to open them and follow along. I should have said that at the beginning. Sorry. Or if it's a vertical, it might be chopped in above me. Okay, question 4. Identify one factor that contributed to the outbreak of revolutions. I'm more like, I'm picking this one. In the period 1750 to 1900. Revolutions, duh, like, of course, a factor that contributed to the outbreak of revolutions, Enlightenment. B, explain one way the revolutionary movements used ideologies. See, they love to have like the same types of questions. Revolutionary movements used ideologies in their attempts to change societies during the period 1750 to 1900. Ideologies of democracy, capitalism, yeah. Explain one way in which revolutionary movements were challenged as they attempted to change societies during the period 1750 to 1900. You could talk about the challenges of the French Revolution with the Reign of Terror. You could talk about, the Latin American revolutions and the Creoles and the Peninsulares, their parents basically like challenging what they were trying. Just thoughts off the top of my head. All right, we're moving on to the DBQ of this one. Let's see. Evaluate the extent to which new transportation and or communication technologies affected African societies during the period circa 1850 to 1960. So that's like from the scramble for Africa to decolonization. Without even looking at the documents, I like this. This is not difficult at all. Transportation and communication technologies, railroads, telephones, telegraphs, no internet yet, but totally awesome. And they give you a map for reference. It's not one of the documents. That's always very helpful. And then we have the bullet points. Just, I'm looking at the sources. All of these, but just based on the prompt and the documents, you've got a picture, you've got some written documents from Britain, from South Africa to British Parliament. Oh, this is all about Britain and Africa. Yes, it is. Okay, so the Cairo to Cape Town idea of building the railroad. Yeah, totally not a bad DBQ. I'll probably use this one in the future when I teach about how to do DBQs. All right, and then on to the LEQs. Okay, so the choices for the LEQs from set 1. In the period 1200 to 1450, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Confucianism included ideas about social structures, gender roles, and political authority that influenced societies across Asia. It's been a while since we've had a religious one like this. Develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which one or more of these belief systems shaped societies and or political systems in Asia during this period. Yeah, not bad, especially if you're good on those early religions spreading and the impact they had. 3, in the period 1450 to 1750, economic, political, and religious rivalries led many imperial states around the world to expand their territories and influence. Develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which economic rivalries were the primary motivation for the expansion of European empires during this period. I mean, that's imperialism. And when it's evaluate the extent to which economic rivalries were the primary motivation, you could argue economic rivalries may have been the primary, but what was secondary? Political, cultural, something along those lines. Or you could say economic rivalries weren't the primary motivation, that in fact it was something else. And then number 4, during the 20th century, medical and scientific discoveries affected life expectancies, access to resources, and social and economic structures, which reshaped individual lives as well as entire societies. Develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which medical and scientific discoveries benefited individuals and or societies during this period, during the 20th century. I feel like this one was on a test not too long ago. Anyway, that's not bad. Although I feel like it's almost like too vague. It might be like you could miss a point or two if you missed a point or two. Overall, I don't see any questions that I really have a problem with on set 1 of AP World. All right, moving on to set 2 of AP World. Putting them right here. Hang on, I have to make my printing bigger so I can see it without squinting as I'm talking to you. All right, so the first SAQ, which is the secondary source, is, oh gosh, I know for a lot of you, your summer homework is to read this book, or even during the year, your teachers ask you to read A History of the World in 6 classes. Bravo, teachers. So yeah, the source is from A History of the World in 6 classes. If you haven't read the book, I would recommend it. Identify one argument the author makes. So argument, claim, right? The author makes regarding tea production in the late 19th and early 20th century. Fair. Describe one likely reason for the change in tea imports to Britain as outlined by the author. Okay, totally fair. Can you read and understand what the passage is saying? And explain how one additional piece of evidence not included in the passage would support the author's claim that China descended into a chaotic period in the 19th and early 20th century. Totally fair. You've got an identify, a describe, and explain. C is one additional piece of evidence, which is evidence beyond the documents. See how those Sourcing skills come in handy for other types of questions. They show up on multiple choice questions as well. Totally fair question. I like this. 2, we have the source from George Padmore, an Afro-Caribbean intellectual, in an essay published while he lived in London in 1956. Identify one reason the United States officials were concerned about communism, as noted in the first paragraph of the passage. Not as noted in your head, but as first paragraph. Easy. Describe the historical situation that resulted in the system of colonialism referred to by the author in the second paragraph of the passage. She's probably talking about imperialism. And then C, explain one way the source reflects the political situation in Africa during the second half of the 20th century. One way the source reflects the political situation. Again, explain is like explaining it rather than just identifying it, but still, I think totally fair questions. This one I think is a little bit challenging, teeny tiny little bit challenging compared to all of the other SAQs, but fair. Question 3. Identify one development that contributed to the spread of gunpowder technologies in the period before 1500. It's interesting because question 3 and set 1 also was relating to gunpowder empires, but in a different way. So similar question that they're asking, but in a different way. B, explain one way the use of military technologies affected the development of land-based empires. Yeah, I mean, one way military technology, the use of gunpowder, in 1450 to 1750, but still totally acceptable. Land-based empires, yeah. I'm at the maybe point on this question. Explain one way navigational technologies contributed to economic change in the period. Oh, navigational technologies, easy peasy. Okay, yeah. The use of the technologies would contribute to increased trade. So that one's not bad. B, I'd be a little bit worried because it's about the development of land-based empires rather than, like, the British Empire wasn't necessarily land-based. I mean, it wasn't a trade-based empire, so you could use Britain. That would be okay. Anyway, let's see what number 4 says. Identify one technological development in communication or transportation in the 20th century. It's almost like too easy. Did any of you get that one and go, wait, is that really all they're asking me to answer? Yeah. B, explain one way nuclear technologies affected international relations in the second half of the 20th century. Oh, I don't know. It caused the Cold War. C, explain one way the spread of new technologies contributed to increased economic activity in the 20th century. Totally would have picked 4. Hands down. Easy. All right. What's the next DBQ? The prompt is evaluate the extent to which the spread of industrialization provided women with new opportunities and or challenges during the period 1850 to 1950. Wow, women's rights. I always tell you guys, when I'm tutoring you, when I'm helping you, I'm like, pay attention to the roles of women throughout history. And I'm just looking at the documents here. A Russian woman labor activist in 1890s. Ottoman women. I've seen this picture before, document 2. It'll be right there if you're watching the video. Bursa, 1902. Chinese women political activists. We're all over the world. That's awesome. Russian Empire, 1912. Japanese women labor activist. Johanna Cornelius, white South African labor activist. Black South African educator and women's rights activist. So when the prompt says, evaluate the extent of which the spread of industrialization provided women with new opportunities and or challenges. So you could even argue the extent to which industrialization provided opportunities versus the extent to which it provided challenges. Just a thought. I like this. The documents seem a tad bit long for my liking, especially since you're doing it on the computer. Like, I really like to physically like circle things, but it's totally a fair DBQ. I like that one too, and I will use that one when I tutor because the role of women, it's so important to have that down. All right, so then the LEQs, and then we move on to APUSH. Okay, first LEQ on set 2 of AP World in the period circa 1450 to 1750. New connections between world regions led to the movement or transfer of people, animals, plants, and pathogens. Develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which movements or transfers led to demographic, cultural, or social changes across the Atlantic region during this period. Yeah, this is the Columbian Exchange, the triangular trade. Oh yeah, I like that. It's a good possibility. 3, during the 18th century Enlightenment. Let me try that again. During the 18th century, Enlightenment philosophers developed new ideas about individual rights and the role of government. Develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which enlightened ideas encouraged movements for political change and or social reform during the period 1750 to 1900. I like that one too. It's a good choice. It's a good problem to have when you're like, I like both of these and I can't pick. Let's see what number 3 is. During the 20th century, competing political and economic interests, along with intense nationalism, contributed to global conflicts. Develop an argument that evaluates the extent to which nationalism was the most important factor contributing to global conflict during this period. I mean, you could pick World War I. It's during the 20th century. I mean, I'd be okay with that. I could write that, but I'd probably pick 2 or 3. And I don't know which one it would be that I would end up picking, which not a bad problem to have. All right. There's the AP World unboxing and processing. Like I said at some point in this video, I think that I will probably, over the summer, create some YouTube videos where I go through and talk about how I would actually answer and brainstorm and write the answers to most of those questions. If you are just here for AP World, you are welcome to go now. If you're sticking around for APUSH, go get yourself a snack, stretch break. Give me just a second, and well, it's going to be just a second because I'll edit out the time in the middle. I'll be right back with you. All right, APUSHers, did you fast forward through the AP World, or did you listen just out of curiosity? AP World kids, are you gone, or are you sticking around just out of curiosity? Because I know a lot of you will probably take APUSH next year too. I welcome all of you, even those of you who aren't taking AP classes and are just listening because you enjoy listening to my podcast. Thank you all for being here. Let me get one more sip of coffee, and then we'll dive into the APUSH FRQs. You get to see me in a different environment today. This is my office rather than the recording studio. All right. Yep, we got 2 sets for the APUSH exam also. So some of you got set 1 and some of you got set 2. We're going to start with APUSH set 1. Why not? And the SAQs. Ooh, the first SAQ, you get 2 documents. Pretty common in an APUSH exam. The Rise of Democracy, Jefferson to Lincoln. And Taming Democracy, the People, the Founders, and the Troubled Ending of the American Revolution. So 2 secondary sources, 2 different historians, probably 2 different perspectives. Briefly describe one major political difference between Wilson's and Boughton's historical interpretations of early United States politics. Kind of find that interesting in the political atmosphere that we're currently experiencing, that they would have a question that goes back to the foundations of America. B, briefly describe, oh, by the way, one major difference, pretty easy to figure those things out. You just have to read them. B, briefly describe how one event or development from 1789 to 1820, not directly mentioned in the excerpts, could be used to support Willent's argument about early US politics. So you just got to find the guy's argument and then apply one thing that happened in history to it. So that's going to come like outside evidence kind of thing. And briefly explain. That's interesting. The first one is briefly describe, and then we have 2 briefly explains. So describe is like just describe the characteristics. Just if you're looking at an American flag, it's red, white, and blue. There's stripes, there's stars. Whereas explain briefly is to give a little bit more information. And then C is briefly describe or briefly explain how one event or development from 1789 to 1820 not directly mentioned in the excerpts could be used to support Bouton's argument about early US politics. So basically one event or historical development that supports each of these guys' arguments. It can be a little bit challenging if you don't have the event or development. It requires a little bit of like wheel spinning, but it's fair. It's not out of line with previous SAQ type questions. And then our second question is a primary source by Daniel Webster, the senator from Massachusetts and future member of the Whig Party, in a speech in the U.S. Senate responding to Robert Y. Hayne of South Carolina, a member of the Democratic Party in 1830. Briefly describe one purpose of political leaders in promoting ideas such as Webster's. So basically, what is the purpose of the political leaders in promoting, like, what are they hoping to achieve? That's pretty fair. And that's describe. So it's like you have to identify the purpose, but then you have to describe its purpose, its existence, its importance. Briefly explain one development from 1820 to 1848 that contributed to the political ideas debated in the speech. So again, you got to come up with a development, something outside of the documents that contributed to the ideas. And C, briefly explain how one political debate between 1848 and 1865 was similar to the debate in the speech. So you have to be familiar with political debates that happened in that short little old time period, which reflects Unit 5, and how it was similar to the debate in the speeches. It's a little bit challenging, but it shouldn't be too difficult because this is the years leading up to the Civil War, when there were a lot of political debates about certain issues. All right, on to questions 3 or 4. Question 3, it's an oldie. At least it starts out as an oldie. Briefly describe one political development in British North America from 1607 to 1753. So in the colonial days, salutatory neglect, political development. So salutatory neglect, the intolerable acts, the 7 Years' War. Yeah, that's okay. That's fine. Briefly describe one effect of the 7 Years' War from 1754 to 1765. Okay, strike that. I was off on the 7 Years' War. But one effect of the 7 Years' War was the king deciding that he needed to tax the colonies and raise money to recoup his costs. Briefly explain how one group responded to debates about the rights of British colonists from 1765 to 1783. One group, I didn't know, the Sons of Liberty, pretty obvious. I'd be iffy about this only because it's not my strong part of American history. Briefly describe one political development during Reconstruction from 1865 to 1877. Now we're talking. Briefly describe one effect of the end of Reconstruction from 1877 to 1900. Yeah, Jim Crow. And briefly explain how one group responded to debates about the federal government from 1900 to 1945. As much as you could be sucked into thinking it needs to be related to Reconstruction, it no longer needs to. I mean, how one group responded to debates about the federal government from 1900 to 1945. I mean, we're talking about New Deal debates. We're talking about America's role in the world wars. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot you could go there. So I think it was a little bit challenging to put that question in there with A and B because it doesn't necessarily relate other than kind of taking us from 1865 to 1877, 1877 to 1900, and then 1900 to 1945. For those of you who have hung around from World to APUSH, you can see that a big difference is that in APUSH, you have to have some more specific examples and more evidence in your head about political develop or just historical developments. All right, moving on to the DBQ. Let's see what you guys were up against on this one. Evaluate the extent to which the role of the federal government in the U.S. economy changed from 1932 to 1980. All right, so 1932 would be when FDR was elected. He took office in 1933. So right off the bat, the role of the federal government changes because of New Deal policies. And then also we get involved in World War II and we become a much bigger player on the international stage. Right? So this is usually what I do before I start even looking at the documents, is think to myself, what do I know already that I can use to answer this question? And then I kind of jot that down on my scrap paper, because it very well could be evidence beyond the documents. I also like to think about, and I didn't really touch on this with the world kids, but like context, how would I contextualize this? So the beginning of the Great Depression, you could contextualize it by just talking about the role of the federal government in the U.S. economy was minimal, that it had changed a little bit during the Industrial Revolution to protect the rights of the workers, or the working conditions. If you think like you could actually write a DBQ without documents, or at least start to write one, you're in good shape, because then you have the documents to work with. First source is from head administrator from the Works Progress Administration, part of the New Deal. Awesome. Second source, U.S. War Food Administration and pamphlets distributed to farmers in 1943. Okay, so we're talking about like the Victory Gardens and the rationing that was going on. Source 3 is a picture, federal officials attending an exhibition about the Federal Aid Highway Act, building the highways, interstate highways. 4, John F. Kennedy, State of the Union Address. I don't know if this was the same one where he said, ask not what you can do for, or what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, but it feels like it's similar vein. 5, Barry Goldwater in his speech accepting the Republican nomination in 1964. Cesar Chavez, leader of the National Farm Workers Association, 1969. And then document 7 is from Marjorie Holt, a Republican member of Congress, in 1976, the case against the reckless Congress. Interesting. But you can use those documents to represent how the role of the federal government changed. And so use those points as things to work off of and interject any knowledge that you have beyond the documents. You're allowed to use more than just one. Recommend it if you can. I really like that DBQ. And then questions 2, 3, or 4 for the LEQ. Evaluate how Native American societies adapted to the presence of European colonists in North America from 1500 to 1754. If you're good on Native American history, if you're good on Unit 1 and into Unit 2, but mostly Unit 1, that would be okay. Again, not my strong suit in U.S. history, so I probably wouldn't do that one. I could. I don't know if I'd get a 6 on it. Evaluate how different reform movements in the United States responded to industrialization from 1820 to 1900. So you have to identify the different reform movements and how they responded to industrialization. Like who was reforming in that time period? I mean, women, minorities, African Americans. I don't know. I might have a challenge with coming up with enough to feel like I had a good, strong essay. I'd need a little more time to think about it. And then number 4, evaluate how the United States foreign policy responded to changes in the world from 1890 to 1930. Yeah, I mean, from 1890, we're talking changes in the world, how the U.S. responded to changes in the world, from like the Spanish-American War times up to the end of World War I and into a period of the U.S. being like, no, we're isolationist. So I'd probably go with that one because I could kind of trace regionally involved to globally involved back to like isolated leading up to 1930. So I go with number 4. Not a fan of any one of those 3 LEQs on set 1, by the way. All right, let me open up set 2, the last and final one. Here we go. All right, SAQ 1. Wow, those are long documents for an SAQ. Sorry, guys. Okay, so the first document, obviously they're both secondary sources. The first one is from Robert A. Pollard, a historian in Economic Security in the Origin of the Cold War from 1945 to 1950, and he published it in 1985. And then the second one is James Patterson, a historian in Grand Expectations, the United States from 1945 to 1974, published in 1996. So both of them are writing about the Cold War period, publishing their work well after. So A says to briefly describe one major difference between Pollard and Patterson's historical interpretations of origins of the Cold War. So you just read the documents and say, what does this guy say about the origin of the Cold War? And then what does this guy say about the origin of the Cold War? What's the major difference? Not hard. B, briefly explain how one event or development from 1940 to 1960 not directly mentioned in the excerpts could be used to support Pollard's interpretations of the origins of the Cold War. So again, that's your specific knowledge of things in history. And it's 40 to 60. So you couldn't use like Bay of Pigs or Cuban Missile Crisis. You'd have to use more of the early tests of the Cold War and the containment policy. And it's from 1940 to 1960. So you could go back to something that happened in World War II. You could go back to those conferences where the tension started to rise between Stalin and Roosevelt, but especially Truman. C, briefly explain how one event or development from 1940 to 1960, not directly not mentioned in the excerpts, could be used to support Patterson's interpretation. So same thing, same time period, but now you have to find something that supports Patterson. So you have to determine their points of view, where are they coming from, and then what's something from in history that would support each of those points of view. Fair question. And then SAQ 2 is from Mary Church Terrell, president of the National Association of Colored Women, in the first presidential address to the association in 1897. A says, briefly describe the author's purpose as expressed in the excerpt. Purpose, there's another sourcing skill. B, briefly explain how one historical development from 1865 to 1897 contributed to the ideas expressed in the excerpt. So again, that knowledge of historical developments. And then C, briefly explain how the ideas expressed in the excerpt contributed to one historical development between 1897 and 1945. So that's causation, how what she's saying or the ideas that she's expressing contributed to something that actually happened after the fact. I like that question because it's cause, B is cause, and then C is effect. I actually really like that question. And 3 and 4 are, you get to choose between them. So number 3, briefly describe one political debate in British North America from 1763 to 1783. Colonial stuff going on. B, briefly describe one effect of the ratification of the U.S. Constitution from 1789 to 1800. I'm okay with that. I love the Constitution. Would love to talk about it. C, briefly explain how one group responded to debates about federal government power from 1800 to 1840. So that's post-Federalist papers. It depends on your knowledge. I mean, I don't know about, again, as I've told you, the early parts of history, units like 1 and 2 are not my strong points. I probably wouldn't answer 3 because of A. 4 says, briefly describe one political debate in the United States between 1910 and 1929. Oh, I don't know, whether or not to get involved in World War I. I mean, it was also the Gilded Age. I don't know, like there was others, but that's the first one that like jumps to my head. B, briefly describe one effect of the New Deal from 1932 to 1945. Increased spending, increased role of government. It doesn't say what kind of effect. So you could pick political, you could pick economic, you could pick cultural. C, briefly explain how one group responded to debates about government power from 1945 to 1970. How one group responded to debates about government power. So you'd have to identify the debate, what the debate was, and it would have to be about government power from 1945 to 1970. Like, what is the role of the U.S. in world politics? Could it also be like involvement in Vietnam? I kind of like involvement in Vietnam because of the one group would be the anti-war people. That's kind of probably where I would go. I would definitely answer 4. All right, the DBQ for set 2 of APUSH is evaluate the extent to which economic changes influenced U.S. society between 1865 to 1910. You know, that last DBQ, I was like, oh yeah, I could totally run with this without the documents. And this one, I'm like, where are you going with this? Economic changes. How they influenced U.S. society. So economics influencing society. And then, so let's look at the doc. Like, I'm not even going to brainstorm this because I'm like, where are we going with this? I want to look at those documents first, or at least the source lines, to see what we're up against. So we've got Francis Vinton, a minister, in a sermon delivered in 1869. He's talking about the railroad. Source 2, Henry George, a journalist and politician, Progress and Poverty, an inquiry into the cause of industrial depressions and the increase of want with increase of wealth. Yeah, I mean, we are like industrial revolution time here, aren't we? 3, Lucy Parsons, formerly enslaved woman and industrial activist, newspaper interview. Okay, monopolies, classes. All right, now I'm getting there. Man, maybe it's because I've been looking at so many of these in the row. I'm like, how did I not see Industrial Revolution? 4, Benjamin Harrison, former Republican president of the United States, supporting the Republican candidate for House of Representatives, talking about the role of the government, robber barons he mentions. 5 is M.E.J. Kelly, a female labor reformer. Okay, industrial leadership, an article in the New York Times. 7 is a political cartoon, President Roosevelt riding on top of a bucking donkey, maybe, that says the trusts. Obviously, he's being the trust buster. It does say the title is The Trust Buster. Okay, so now I feel a little bit more confident about that question because I'm like, where is this going? Oh, duh, Industrial Revolution and trusts and monopolies and labor concerns and all that kind of stuff. So it's not bad. I like set 1 better. Mostly because I could try to answer it without needing the help. And then last but not least, the LEQs. So evaluate how British colonists in the Americas adapted to their environments from 1607 to 1754. Told you, I keep telling you guys, not my strong point as far as the time period goes. I probably could write about it because they were settling and I could talk about where they settled, but I don't know. I don't think it would be strong. 3, evaluate how sectional tensions shaped the United States society from 1800 to 1848. The scary part with number 2 here on the LEQ is that you may venture past 1848 with those sectional tensions and how they shaped society. You'd have to stick to a lot of the earlier stuff that still created those tensions and come up with specific examples. And what is this, Unit 5? Unit 4. So how strong are you on Unit 4 is the question. And then 4, evaluate how U.S. society responded to economic changes from 1960 to 1970. Okay, so now you're getting into Kennedy and Johnson and Nixon and Ford and Carter. And like, I would write about this because it would be fresh in my memory to be able to write about some of those economic changes that happened in the more recent decades of U.S. history. I'd say all three of those LEQs are a little bit challenging. I think they're from time periods that are not Civil War, not World War II, not World War One. But yeah, I think on the whole, I liked set one better than set two for U.S. history, where, world history, I really didn't have a preference. They all seemed okay. But it's the luck of the draw. So hopefully you got the ones that you were most confident about. Let me know in the comments of whichever platform you are listening or watching on, what your thoughts were about the exam that you took. If you have any questions about any of the questions, do let me know, and be looking for me to release some videos on YouTube, and I'll probably post them on my website too over the summer, getting into more depth with a little bit of time to think about how I would answer these and the process that I would go through in answering. It would be especially helpful to you if you're in AP World and you're going to be taking APUSH, or vice versa. Or if you're going to be taking AP Euro, it's still the basic ideas, same processes. So you guys, thanks so much for tuning in and joining me over the course of the year. My audience has grown exponentially, and as I just muffled my microphone, from the bottom of my heart, I thank you for your time, for your commitment, for your attention to helping you to do better. Ultimately, that's why I'm here. This is what I love to do. I love to be in the classroom with my kids, and you are all now my kids. So have a wonderful summer. Let me know how you did on the exam. And hopefully I will hear from you and see you all back in my audience in August. And with that, this episode of the AP History Help podcast is now history.